you. Thanks so much for coming to the session. I appreciate Mariela bringing her class. And I want to thank all of you for doing the work that we do, that you do as educators. You're in the front lines, and it's not easy work. So thank you for the work that you do as teachers and principals, becoming principals. And also, I know that there's some instructional coaches. Just to give you a sense for what we did in part one of this session, I believe the audience in that session was more, I believe it was mainly faculty here at UTSA. And so we discussed different ideas, how people conceptualize culturally relevant pedagogy. We talked about Gloria Latson-Billings, Geneva Gay, other scholars who have been engaged with culturally relevant pedagogy. So that we went through that, how people think about culturally relevant pedagogy. So let me turn to the next slide just to kind of give you a sense for what I hope to do with this session. So the objectives are to review components of culturally relevant pedagogy, because I had presented those in the last session, and also to continue discussion of social action plans. And I'll talk a little bit about those as well. To present a framework and examples of teaching mathematics for social justice. What does that mean? And then also to discuss future directions of culturally relevant pedagogy in your own work. Okay, so some of the criteria that came up, and this is directly from Gloria Latson-Billings' work. How many of you are familiar with that work? Okay, so if you're not, then the criteria that we looked at, basically there were three criteria that came up. One was developing students academically, the need to have students exposed to very high challenging mathematics. In my case, I focus a lot on math and ESL, bilingual education students. And then also, so having students developing students academically, and also nurturing and supporting students' cultural competence at home and at school. We talked about supporting students to become not only successful in school, but also not to forget about where they come from. I think the discussion had focused in part one about, I had given an example about how I went to a school and observed in New York. It was one of the KIPP schools, and I was observing the teacher teaching mathematics, and all of a sudden this African-American girl sits at her desk and she's moving a little bit, and he throws the eraser at her. And we're supposed to be studying highly effective schools, right? Because they're considered to be a highly effective school based on different criteria that we were looking at. So we talked about how the KIPP schools tend to promote this idea of, and I believe there's one in Houston, but it seems like where the schools are promoting that kids forget about where they come from. And it's more like you're going to succeed academically, and you're going to an Ivy League school, and you forget about where you came from. But Gloria Latson-Billings is saying we don't do that. We have to help students, support them to become successful academically, not only at school, but also at home, for really focusing and taking on that foundation of their identity. Where is it that they're coming from? And building on that as a resource. So then the third piece is developing socio-political or critical consciousness. And that is a piece that I think tends to be forgotten with this framework, that there is a third component. And so how is it that we help students develop socio-political or critical consciousness? So if I'm a consumer, I go to the store and I buy shoes. Do I pay attention to where those shoes were made, for example? Who's behind making these shoes? Is it children, maybe? Are they being exploited in other countries? So that kind of consciousness, and do we bring that context into the discussion of teaching mathematics or any other subject that you're thinking about teaching? And so this is a third point of that of culturally relevant pedagogy. Now this is also a review because we talked about how in my own courses I use social action plans with students. These are part of their final projects. To have students engaged in the community, it can be in a school setting, in their neighborhoods, depending on the context they're in. And then, so what they do is there's a lot more sub-bullets, but this is what I could fit in. First, I have them take inventory describing socio-political context of the school or community they're in, identifying an inequity. What's an inequity around? Maybe in your school, if you can, I'm not sure how to proceed with this group since you didn't see the first part, but if you can think of your own neighborhoods, what might you consider to be an inequity? Think about that for about, I don't know, a few seconds, jot down some ideas, and think about what might be some things that are not fair around your context. So for about 30 seconds, just take some time to note some ideas of inequities or in your own school context. And I'm going to give this PowerPoint to Lorena or Effie so that they can put it up on the Moodle, I think. So the one from last time and the one from this time. That way you're not spending so much time if you miss something from the slides. So I want you to turn to someone else next to you and talk about an inequity that you identified, and then see what kinds of inequities you're coming up with. I'm just curious to hear from the group. Okay, I'm going to ask you to stop. I know that.
It generates discussion.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off, but I'm going to ask you to share quickly what are some inequities that you might have identified. And then, is there someone who would like to volunteer there? What you came up with? Yeah.
Oh, sorry, just get too slow. Well, I'm from Brownsville, and I was telling my group, well, you know how Borders books folded all across the country? Well, in Brownsville, we had Walden Books, which was an affiliate of Borders. Well, as soon as that one folded too, there are now no bookstores in Brownsville, Texas.
Wow.
Also in McAllen.
Yeah, also in McAllen,
so I
yes.
drive an hour and a half to get to a bookstore.
Yeah, now there is a Barnes & Noble, right? There's one there in McAllen, but yeah, and so why is that so? You begin to ask yourself, why is it so that this happens, specifically in that community? Is it to keep people in their place? What is it? What is it? Or is there a business perspective that comes into play? And asking the why questions. Why? Why not? So 3 pieces of that taking of a social action plan is students identify an inequity. So I wanted to give you a sense of what I mean by an inequity, and then taking aim by discussing inequity using the class readings for my course and evidence of why the problem exists. I have them think about themselves as social active agents of change. So are you a white, Methodist, male? What perspective are you bringing into this, situating the problem? Are you a Latina, Catholic, strong advocate of students? What perspective are you bringing into the situation? And then in the taking action piece, I have students actually implement a plan of action. So not just identifying what the inequity is, but how are you going to address it? Perhaps it's, sending a letter to, somebody who's in charge, for example, at the state level. Are they going to do anything about a Spanish version of the test? So what kind of action are they going to take to try to address that inequity? So that it's not just about identifying and we don't do anything about it, but what steps can we take, concrete steps, to then make some kind of change, some kind of plan that might lead to some change. So that was what we did in part 2, and this wasn't it. I'm just taking 2 slides that represent for me what the conversation was about. But in your groups, discuss what we mean by a socially just society. So if there are inequities, what is it that we mean by socially just society, and teaching mathematics for social justice? So those are good ideas to start this conversation of what does it mean to have a socially just society. And I'm going to go to this specific video clip. Lidia Gonzalez, I don't know her personally. I've only met up with her at conferences quickly in the hallways, but she's an assistant professor of math and computer science. And I'm going to show this video clip where she talks about what is math for social justice. So let me go to this real quick. And I'm hoping that the sound is okay. Let me know if you can hear it pretty well or not.
One question is, well, we're going to have a whole talk on math for social justice. We might as well figure out what the heck social justice is. And you can disagree. It's fine. There you go. So since this is the topic we're discussing, it makes sense, I think, to define what a socially just society might be. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of different discrepancies between what people think with respect to this. And the teachers and I, our very first meeting was centered around this question. We had nice, very heated arguments about what we meant. So drawing from the work of Micheli, who was actually on my dissertation committee, a very, very good education scholar at the Pew Graduate Center, and Kaiser, they wrote about education and democracy. And that, coupled with this idea from this gentleman named Werty about distributive justice, basically the idea that resources of all types should be equally distributed, that leads to the topmost bullet point there. And in addition to that, I rely on Gutierrez. This is Michelle Gutierrez, also pretty well known in this area, a lot younger, sort of getting started. She argued that equity in education is being unable to predict student patterns like achievement, participation, ability to critically analyze data based solely on characteristics such as race, class, ethnicity, gender, beliefs, and proficiency in the dominant language. And if we expand on that, not just looking at success in education, but success in life in general, we can come up with this second bullet point, which takes all of those characteristics and says, let's say that success in life can't be predicted based on any of these. It's really sad, and I can't tell you exactly where I read it, that the best predictor of a student's success in school tends to be the zip code where they live. There's something wrong with that.
So here, I mean, it looks like she's confirming some of the ideas that came up, equal distribution of resources. So I wanted to show you at least that little piece of her lecture. It runs for a full, it's over an hour. So I just wanted to show this piece of her lecture to have you see. Y'all are definitely on the right track in terms of thinking what what we mean by these socially just society. Then we also have, this is a teacher from Canada, And she more specifically talks about what is teaching mathematics for social justice. And so I'm going to go to that clip. And as you watch the video clip, jot down any ideas that come up about how we think about teaching mathematics for social justice. I'm trying to minimize this. I'm getting some weird stuff here.
Social justice math happens when students solve problems using numbers that really matter. The social justice issues themselves become the context for the math that the students are doing. In a typical class.
Sorry, this didn't quite work the way I wanted it to. So again, this is a teacher from Canada. I guess.
Social justice math happens when students solve problems using numbers that really matter. The social justice issues themselves become the context for the math that the students are doing. In a typical classroom, when students are learning about graphing, they might be looking at graphs of favorite food or favorite colors. But in a social justice math classroom, students will be analyzing graphs showing voter turnout in federal elections, or yearly hate crime statistics from the Toronto Police. When you're using social justice math, you're really looking at the curriculum through a different lens. You're still working on the same expectations, but you're using numbers that are real, authentic, enlightened, engaged, and empowered to really make a difference in the world. And I think one of the biggest challenges is you have to be aware and you have to care. You have to know that there are problems going on in the world, like homelessness or unsafe working conditions, and you have to really want to make a difference for the better. You don't have to be an expert on any one of the particular issues. What you have to do is just find the numbers. You find the numbers, and the power of social justice math is the students will drive the discussion, they'll drive the thinking, and they'll really drive the conclusions. Our world can seem like a pretty overwhelming place sometimes for young people, but social justice math really lets students learn about the different issues, but also learn how they can make a difference for the better. Social justice math takes time. You can't simply open a textbook and have students start answering questions. You have to do some research first yourself. Talk to your colleagues, read the newspaper, look in children's books to find social justice issues. Your job is to find the numbers and let the students work with them. Social justice math really lets you integrate your math into language programs. When students are learning about a particular issue, they're reading articles and stories, they're watching media pieces, they're creating their own awareness campaigns to teach other people. They're reflecting on their thoughts and feelings. And that's what's really great about social justice math. The students are learning to think critically in their math, their reading, and their writing. When you're using social justice math in the classroom, like any other good classroom, you need to make sure you have open lines of communication between you and your students' families. That could happen through newsletters, the type of homework questions you send home, but most likely it happens when students go home and share what they've learned in your classroom at the dinner table. In my class, we were answering multiplication questions, learning about fair trade chocolate. One of my students was very excited, went home, shared what she had learned with her family, and came back a couple weeks later and was really proud to tell the class that her mom had purchased fair trade chocolate for her family. Families will see that students are excited, they'll see that they're interested, they'll see that they're engaged, and they'll be proud that their children are really trying to make a difference. Well, we want to create citizens. We want to create students that are going to go on and be our leaders. And our leaders have to care. They have to want to make a difference. We're very lucky that we live in Canada. And as teachers, we're part of a privileged profession. And we have an obligation to use that privilege to make the world a better place. Students need to learn to think critically. They need to be able to watch commercials and know if things are right and if they're fair.
I'm going to go ahead and stop it there, but so turn to someone and just talk about what are some things that teaching math for social justice does. Okay, so what it is, and then what might be some outcome of